What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel for another review. I know I've been a bit inconsistent with my video output in the last couple of weeks. Life happens, don't worry, I didn't go anywhere. I'm not planning on going anywhere, but I do have a lot of catch up to do. I still have to review the new Final Destination as well as Hurry Up Tomorrow and Bring Her Back. But today we are talking about the film that comes out this weekend and is smack dab in like the top 3 on my list of most anticipated of the entire year, and that is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Previously known as Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 2, but of course they changed it from being a 2-part series, even though this is very clearly the part 2 of a 2-part story. Back in the day, like right around the time that Rogue Nation or maybe Ghost Protocol was coming out, I didn't appreciate this series for what it truly is, and it has grown on me with every year that passes. I go back and rewatch these movies all the time, even the first couple, with the exception of 2. I think 2 is still pretty bad, and maybe the only bad entry in the entire franchise. But 4 through 6, man, you know what, 4 through 7, we'll throw Dead Reckoning in there too. That is an excellent, like one of the best runs in an action franchise that I can think of. So I'd be lying to you if I said my expectations weren't sky high for this movie. Tom Cruise always delivers. Him and Christopher McQuarrie have proven themselves to be a very powerful duo. I mean, Fallout. Let's talk about Fallout for a second, because I genuinely think that is one of the greatest action films of the 21st century. It's just an all-around 10 out of 10. Now, I don't see any purpose in beating around the bush. Let's just get right down to business and talk about my overall thoughts on this film. I enjoyed The Final Reckoning, but I do think it is one of the weakest entries in the franchise, maybe even the second weakest, right ahead of number 2. It's a 3-hour film that absolutely does not need to be 3 hours long, and I'll talk about why I think it easily could have been trimmed down to a more reasonable runtime. When it comes to my thoughts on the story of The Final Reckoning, I do think it finds itself somewhere between the jumbled, desperate fan service that you see in something like The Rise of Skywalker and the genuine, grand finale that you see in something like Avengers Endgame. It's nowhere near as bad as the former and nowhere near as good as the latter, but I see elements of both of those in the backbone of this movie's structure. It picks up just a few months after the events of Dead Reckoning. The entity is still out there. Ethan Hunt is now in possession of the cruciform key needed to unlock the Sevastopol, aka the submarine that houses the source code for the entity, and basically the only means that they can stop it, or control it if they choose to go that route. Now, everything that I just told you is pretty much what you get out of the first hour of this movie. There are other plot points that are addressed in that first hour, but so much time could be shaved off of this runtime if the writers would have just realized that we don't need all of these expository dumps. One of the things that I love about a lot of the previous Mission Impossible films is that they show us things happening and then explain to us what was actually going on through some sort of crazy plot twist. This movie kind of just lays it on straight up. It would rather explain the plot to you as if you're 10 years old than actually let you do some of the guesswork yourself first, and that's a disappointment. Additionally, I find it frustrating that the movie spends so much time explaining things that were already shown in the previous movie. It doesn't trust that the audience remembers anything from the last one, and just in case you haven't, it makes sure to repeat itself. I mean, there are lines of dialogue recycled over and over again that keep beating you over the head with things that they've already shown you a couple of times in this very film. I also just don't like the way the first hour, maybe hour and a half, is edited. It feels messy. There's a lot of weird insert close-up shots. Sometimes characters aren't able to finish a line of dialogue without there being several cuts, and that seems out of character for a series as prestigious as Mission Impossible. With that said, there is a point in this film where I think the tide starts to turn towards the positive, and it's around the halfway mark. As soon as Ethan enters this submarine, I think the pacing of the film really picks up, and we do get some excellent set pieces here. I'd be lying if I told you that 2 of the stunts that he performs in here aren't some of the craziest shit I've ever seen. Say what you want about Tom Cruise. I get that he's a bit unhinged when it comes to his ties to the Church of Scientology, but the dude is one of the few remaining actors of his generation to be genuinely dedicated to his craft to the point that he's willing to put his life on the line in these crazy situations just to get that perfect shot. What the hell, I'm just gonna say it because it's in the trailer, right? The plane stunt. The stunt where he is dangling from a biplane. We saw something similar to that in Fallout, so I do think they're getting to a point in this series where they're running out of original ideas for ways to put Tom Cruise in danger. But it was pretty cool to see him do this again, and it's a very long sequence with so much nail-biting tension, and I'm really impressed by the way that they are able to amp up the tension, despite the fact that through a large portion of the movie, I don't want to spoil things, but they're not going to kill Ethan Hunt off halfway through this movie. And yet I still found myself on the edge of my seat when he finds himself in these situations. But moving back into my issues, despite the fact that I think Ethan Hunt and Tom Cruise simultaneously are the face of the MI films, they've really evolved into a team dynamic, an ensemble type film in which every member of the team means something. And it's great to see Benji come back and Luther, but there's a bunch of new faces here, and I don't think they had any idea what to do with a lot of these characters. For instance, there's these two government operatives played by Shea Wiggum, I think I'm saying his name right, and Greg Davis. These two characters have spent the entirety of the last movie pursuing Ethan, and they spend most of this movie doing it as well. And every time they have him dead to rights, they for some reason let him go. And it just feels so nonsensical to repeat that over and over again. Give me some damn character development. But at times this movie feels so scattershot and unsure of what it wants to do that it doesn't spend enough time with most of the characters to get me to care about them as much as I care about Hunt. And I get that there are tropes that they want to follow with this spy genre, but sometimes I think they get a little bit too much into that trend of devoting or delegating roles to the characters, like, oh, this person's going to defuse the bomb, and now this person has to guard them while they're defusing the bomb, and now this person's injured, so this person has to provide medical assistance, and then it becomes the Ethan Hunt show, and we all love to see that. But at this point, they've kind of turned him into a messiah. I wouldn't be surprised if Tom Cruise gets a major god complex, if he doesn't already have one, from starring in this film, because Ethan Hunt, it's explained through exposition repeatedly that he is the only person that can save the world, but he's also the only person that caused the situation that they're in, with the entity being able to infest every corner of the world and affect public opinion. And the stakes are so massively high at this point. And I just remember back to the days when they were doing smaller scale infiltration missions and how that was much more interesting than these massive end of the world stakes that are in The Final Reckoning. Another gripe that I have is Dead Reckoning, whether you love it or hate it, did a lot of setup. It introduced this character, Gabriel, who is the main villain throughout these two films, at least aside from the entity, the only human villain. And they set up this whole idea that he is deeply involved with Ethan's past before he joined the IMF. And due to all the flashbacks that we got a brief glimpse of in the previous movie, I expected there to be more of an exploration of that in The Final Reckoning. There isn't. He is the same generic bad guy that he was in the last movie. If anything, he's even more ridiculous here. I think Esai Morales, if I'm saying his name correctly, does a good job with the material, but he's playing a Bond villain in a Mission Impossible film. There is literally a point where he is making goofy faces at Hunt when he's standing over him, and I could not take it seriously. And this movie is very self-serious. It wants itself to be taken completely literally, and yet I feel like it's one of the most ludicrous entries in the franchise. With that said, the humor is still there. The personality that these films have is present. It's just all of these jumbled story elements and the fact that the pacing is so rough in the first half that bog it down a little bit. I was impressed by the fact that they were able to bring some elements back from the past, even like the first three movies, and make them relevant to the story here. I don't think all of them needed to be there. This is definitely one of those cases where I think it delves into Rise of Skywalker territory of trying to tie everything together in an unnecessary way. But it's a fun little Easter egg for those of us who have stuck around for the entire series. And I will tell you that if you're here for the set pieces and the stunts, the two big ones are worth the price of admission alone. I just think a lot of people need to taper their expectations, because while this is not a bad film by any means, it is easily the weakest out of the last 4 or 5 entries. And when the bar is set so incredibly high, you want them to stick to that bar with consistency, especially when this is supposedly the end of the franchise. I think it could go either way in that regard. I'm going to give The Final Reckoning 3 stars. It's definitely closer to a 3.5 than it is a 2.5. But I just couldn't justify giving it any higher. I couldn't justify giving it any lower either, because I think it's a fun time. I had fun watching it. I just wish it was better, and it could have been if they did a few more drafts of the script. Just as a reference point, I gave Dead Reckoning a 9 out of 10, so there's a pretty sizable difference in quality here, in my opinion. So those are my thoughts on The Final Reckoning. Be sure to let me know what you think of it down in the comments. Before you head out, your mission is to hit that like button and subscribe. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.